Hi everybody, and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Phoenix P1. The Phoenix P1 is an interchangeable lens SLR. It was available in black and silver. This is the entriest of entry-level cameras. I don't know a better way to say it. The Phoenix P1 is based on the chassis for the Cosina C1. They're not trying to hide the manufacturer or the chassis information there at all. And many other cameras use that same chassis for their build. I don't have a complete list of them. There's Olympus. I think the Nikon FM10 might be an advanced version of it. These are a number of years old. There may be 10 or a dozen different cameras that are fundamentally underneath the exact same thing, and that's the Cosina C1. This camera has shutter speeds of 1 second up to 1/2000th of a second, and you can see that there on the shutter speed dial. And they are all manual shutter speeds. There's no automatic mode for this camera. And it also has bulb, and like the K1000, you can go straight from 1 second to bulb 1/2000th. You don't have to, there's no stop preventing you from going the other way. The frame coverage on this is an honestly impressive 93%. With magnification of 0.84%. Now what that means is that what you're going to see here is 84% of the size of what's coming in through the lens, and that what you see through the viewfinder is 93% of the frame. So if you're looking through the viewfinder and you saw what you're seeing now, then 7% of what's going to be on the film would be cut off. It would be outside of the viewfinder. And that means that when you get the photos back, you can crop them fairly easily, and you have a little bit of room to do that. We'll switch over to this camera since it has the actual and appropriate lens on it that came with them. The viewfinder in this is a fixed split prism focusing screen, and the flash sync on this camera is 1/125th of a second, which you can see right there, because it's marked in red, and we'll talk about what that means, the flash sync, in the second video. The target market for the Phoenix P1 is entry level. It is a reasonably good first camera for film classes. If you're starting out in photography class, this is as good a first camera for your first photography class as any film camera will be. It does everything you need to do. It's very simple. And if it breaks after a couple of years, it's not the end of the world, because your first camera is not going to be your last camera. Your first camera should be your least expensive camera. Basically, the reason that this is such a good first camera is because it's effectively an all-plastic K1000 with a slightly faster shutter speed and a light-up meter instead of a dial. So if your photography professor says you should get something like a K1000, this is very much like a K1000. It was made by Cosina in Nakano, Japan, and it's hard for me to say exactly when this was made. I tried hard to find out when the Phoenix P1 was made. The Cosina C1 chassis has been around for a long time. Near as I could tell, the Phoenix P1 started production in 1999, and was out of production maybe as late as 2007. But somewhere in that range is when this camera would have been produced. The way I found that out was I went to the Internet Wayback Machine, and I started looking for Cosina advertising materials and things like that. And the most recent mention I could find of the Phoenix P1 in the Internet Wayback Machine was from 2007. So as we do, let's go over the camera's features. And this is the top of the camera, but we'll start on the front here with the strap lugs. This is where you would put your camera strap to connect it and hang it around your neck. Over here we have the film rewind knob and lever. This is what you would use to rewind your film, and if you lift it up to get to the film back. Flash hot shoe. That little black line right there is your shutter speed index, and it tells you which shutter speed you have selected. Shutter speed dial, ISO selection dial, film advance lever, shutter activation, and frame count window. The front of the camera, we see the lens mount right here. This Phoenix P1 uses Pentax K mount lenses, so the lens releases over here, and the shutter mounting index is here. One really nice thing about the Phoenix P1 compared to other cameras on this Cosina chassis is that it has a metal flange, not a plastic flange. And that makes the Phoenix P1 one of, if not the nicest, of the Cosina C1 cameras. On the side here, we have a PC port for your flash. This is something that I also don't know that all of the C1 cameras have. If I'm wrong about that, if all of the C1 cameras have a PC port, I'm certain someone will let me know. On the back of the camera, we have the viewfinder eyepiece right here and the film memo window. So when you put film in, as we'll see in the second video, you can see what type of film it is in the camera. And then on the bottom, we have the battery chamber, tripod bushing, made in Japan, and the film rewind release button right there. On the inside of the camera, we have the film cassette chamber here, the shutter opening. There are guide rails, but instead of being metal and silver, they're plastic and black. So the guide rails here, may or may not be able to see them by my fingers. These are the guide rails that mesh with the film pressure plate to keep the film flat. And then there are some outer guide rails here. All four of these are molded into the inside of the camera. Those keep the film from moving up and down as it travels. This is the film take-up spool. And what it does is it prevents the film from moving backwards once it's pulled into the film take-up reel right here. Film pressure plate there, and the foam around the window. One other nice thing about this camera is that it has a metal hook right here that helps keep the camera back shut. And this metal hook, which even nice cameras like the Minolta Maxim 7 have a plastic hook, I found out when it broke. Anyway, the metal hook is pretty durable and will last for a pretty long time, and make sure that your film camera doesn't just pop open if it should happen to break. Because it's metal, it shouldn't break. Some notes about the Phoenix P1. It is, by the standards of when it was made, it was a very stripped down camera. There's no autofocus, the light meter is very simple, it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. By the standards of 30 years earlier, it was pretty much a standard mid-range camera. So that should tell you a little bit about how much camera technology advanced from the 70s to the 2000s. Actually, if this had come out in the 70s, it would have been a really sought-after camera because it would have been advanced by those days' standards. It needs batteries here on the bottom, but they only power the light meter. You can do all of the shutter speeds on this camera work without batteries. So if you don't have batteries, or if they exploded in your battery chamber, you can still use everything on this camera except for the light meter. The standard lenses that came with this camera were either this zoom lens, which is a 35 to 70 millimeter zoom lens. It's a standard zoom lens, not really worth writing home about. It could also have come with the Phoenix 50 millimeter f1.9, which I don't have to show you, but it's, by all accounts, everything I've read, it's considered an exceptional 50 millimeter lens, especially by budget 50 millimeter lens standards. So if you're looking for a first film camera for a photo class or just for fun, one of these guys with a 50 millimeter lens is going to be a really hard kit to beat in terms of performance and price. So, your lens options kit are a really good 50 millimeter lens or a fairly meh 35 to 70. Don't store it with the shutter armed. So right now it's ready to go to take a picture. You don't want to store it that way. You want to trigger the shutter before you store it because it has a completely mechanical shutter. There are springs in there that are under tension, and if they rest under tension for a long time, it can throw off your shutter timing or prevent your shutter from operating properly. So if you're done for the day and you're going to let it sit for a few days, I let it if it's overnight. Even if I have to waste a frame, I'll trip the shutter to take the tension off of the springs in the camera. When you have the film back open, you don't want to touch the shutter itself because that's a really good way to brick your shutter and ruin it. And even though they're not expensive cameras, they are perfectly capable of taking very nice images, and there's no reason to destroy a perfectly good camera. With the mirror, you don't want to touch that because your finger oils can tarnish the mirror. I say touching the mirror, almost touching the mirror, twice. Your finger oils can. With the mirror, you don't want to touch the mirror because your finger oils can tarnish it. And if they do, that can impair metering and your ability to focus correctly. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car. Oil from the lenses, if it gets warm, can get onto the aperture blades, and that can lead to the aperture not working correctly. Same thing here with oils getting into different parts of the mechanism than they should be. If they heat up and get really thin and then travel, or if it's really cold, they can get thick and gummy and then they won't work properly. Also, anytime you're out photographing and you're in your car, take your camera gear with you when you leave your car. Even if you're just on the interstate and you're popping into the rest area bathroom to go to the bathroom really quickly, you take your gear with you, because leaving your camera gear in your car, a thief is not going to be picky about what camera they steal. It's a lot easier to take it with you and come back out to an intact window and have your camera than to leave it in your car and come back out to no camera and a broken window. So anytime you get out of your car when you're traveling, take your camera gear with you. And same thing, don't leave it in your car overnight. Always take your camera out of your car when you get out of it. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box, because even though it's an entry-level camera and it's easily replaced, it is still a precision tool that is very good at what it does, which is take photos, and has good mechanical timing. If fungus gets onto the lens, it will impair your image quality. There's less of a concern about fungus getting into the rubber or plastic and making it smell bad, but you still don't want to mess up your lenses. If you do store it in plastic, make sure you have a rechargeable desiccant pack, the kind that you can put in the oven and recharge when it turns a certain color. Also, don't let this camera get wet. It is an entry-level camera. It's not weather sealed, and water can get in there and short out the circuits, which there aren't many of. I mean, the battery goes from, with some wires up to a light meter, up to a couple of LEDs, but still, if it gets wet, it can theoretically ruin that or cause any of the metal components inside of this to rust. And just remember, your Phoenix P1 is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.